All right, welcome. I want to talk about the Utah Hockey Club and kind of what they've done and what their roster looks like. I put Yetis Outlaws because those seem to be the two finalists for the name. We'll see. Still got my fake Arizona Coyotes jersey on because why not? Coyotes. Utah still has $36.1 million in cap space. Keep in mind they have Shea Weber's contract, which is on LTIR. So what it says on Cap Friendly, add that. You got $36.1 million. Looking at their roster, this is just on Cap Friendly because Bukestad, number one center. I don't know, man. But Clayton Keller, Bukestad, Schmaltz, line one, line two. Kraus, Barrett Hayden, Dylan Gunther, line three. Michelli, Cooley, Doan. Right off the bat, that's a great top six right there. Fourth line, Carcone, McBain, Kerfoot. Solid fourth line. Depth, you have Liam O'Brien, Travis Boyd, unrestricted free agent. 30 years old, saw limited action last year. We'll see if he re-signs as a depth player or not. Defense, where they needed a lot of help, it's now Sergachev, Dursey, projected on that first line. Second line with Valimaki and John Marino. Not too bad. Third line, two players they just signed extensions with, Kolyachonok and Kesselring. With depth being Victor Soderstrom, who is a restricted free agent, and Maverick Lamoureux. Looks like the dude's a giant. He's like 6'7". He's putting up great numbers in the QJMHL. He's signed. Does he get loaned for another year? Does he get a chance to be on this roster, get some NHL time? Lamoureux looks good, but there's a lot of prospects that Utah has that are getting near signing time and NHL playing time, and there's only so many roster spots to go around, and this is kind of what we projected, right? They have all these players ready to come in at around the same time, and you're still trying to sort through who should stay, who should go, what do you trade, what do you need, and such, right? So that's kind of where we're transitioning with Utah, but nonetheless, defensive prospect list for Utah, not super high, not super deep. They do have some pretty highly touted prospects, Lamoureux, Simashev being one, for example. A couple other guys that are decent, project to be NHL players as well. But nonetheless, this year, Utah wants to be a little more competitive. Makes sense. First year, new location, new arena, new branding, new everything, same team. So you got plenty of money. They're spending it. They still got plenty left to spend if they want to. But I think that defensive core with Sergachev and John Marino gets a lot better. I'd say overall, this is a pretty solid roster. This is a playoff roster, I would say. We'll see. They were looking like they could be a fringe playoff team this past season, and then they just had a collapse. They lost 10-plus games in a row. I forget the exact number. In net, they have Connor Ingram, who's been a great story, and Vejmelka, and a lot of people aren't super high on Vejmelka. I love Vejmelka. I think he's great. I think it's a pretty solid tandem in that. They also have Villalta, who saw, what he played, 2 games last year. Didn't look great, but his AHL stats were pretty solid. So I'd assume he's another third goaltender at this point. So with this roster, what do you need? Depth. You need depth. You got to fill out your AHL. I would assume they'd sign a depth forward or two, maybe one of those fringe fourth line AHL type guys to come up if there's an injury. You got guys that can play higher up in the lineup. Kerfoot, no stranger to playing a middle six position. Depth on defense, mostly maybe a seventh defenseman, maybe AHL, depending on Lamoureux and the Soderstrom contract. Probably a depth defenseman you can keep in the AHL, similar to a Josh Brown, what they saw last year, although Brown played a lot of NHL time, comparatively speaking, to the rest of his career on the other teams he's been on. And probably a goaltender depth. You could say Villalta, third goaltender if you want, but if something happens to Ingram or Vejmelka, are you going to rely on Villalta to come in and play decent backup hockey? I don't know. That's a big question I would have. Maybe bringing in a guy like, I don't know, Spencer Martin, where you can kind of just shove in the AHL if you want. And depending on how Villalta looks when he comes up, you at least have the option of bringing up Spencer Martin as well. Or sending Villalta back down and bringing up Spencer Martin to be your backup goaltender until the injury is all healed from any injury that could happen. You always want to have some type of backup plan. Right now, the goaltending depth isn't all that great once you get past the top three in Utah now. They have a fourth goaltender. I forget his name. I do not have it. Oh, I do. Anson Thornton got sent down to the ECHL, and his AHL stats not super impressive. I'd be surprised if he gets called up. What would they want? Well, I don't know. Goaltender and defensive prospects, perhaps. Maybe, I don't know, like Sergachev, Dursey. I think it's pretty solid. Dursey's come a long way. Valimaki, I think, has played a very solid defensive style of hockey. Pedro John Marino is going to be a solid second line, I would think. Kolyachonok, Kessering, pretty solid in their own zone as well. So I think their top six is good. You have Lamoureux, who can slot in as well. Maybe takes a spot in the top four. Maybe you end up moving a guy like John Marino down to the third line. But you have some depth to work with on defense. So maybe for the future, in terms of defensive prospects, you want to continue to build up that pool. But for me, it's goaltending. What is there? You got, at this point, two NHL goaltenders, two goaltenders in the AHL per se, assuming Villalta starts the season in the AHL. And you have one goaltending prospect, Coronar. Please just assume I said that name right. I know I'm butchering that real bad. But at the same time, you want to start building up your prospects. So once some of these players leave or you have to trade someone to make room for another spot, you want to still have a replenished farm system. That's how we've seen some of these teams have continued success in the NHL playoffs. And to a point where their farm systems will be completely depleted, like Boston, Pittsburgh, Tampa Bay, for example, and they take a bit of a step back, and they have to replenish that farm system, as we're seeing in Tampa and Boston, and somewhat Pittsburgh, more NHL ready prospects in Pittsburgh, but at the same time, both clubs trying to bump up their farm systems a bit, right? I would say it's got to be a top two center. Bukestad, probably a fourth line player, maybe a third line center at best. Had a career year last year. He played very well. Had a hat trick against the Minnesota Wild, his former team. So I think he's from Minnesota too. So there's that. Barrett Hayton, it could be hit or miss as to what to expect from Barrett Hayton. We'll see. Logan Cooley, fantastic prospect. Will continue to grow. Finish the season strong. Is a top two center at the very least at this point in his career. Probably should be the number one center in the future, depending on how the lines play up in the chemistry and all that such. Right? Boston, for example, we've seen Pastrnak play a lot of time on the second line. He's a bona fide superstar, but you want to have a nice balance between your top two lines in terms of offensive scoring and danger chances, right? So Cooley, probably a number one center. I don't know if I'm ready to say that. He's probably a number two center at this point, but nonetheless, maybe in this next year he takes that jump and is that number one center. Does he work in a line with Keller Schmaltz, or is he more productive in a line with Kraus Gunther? For example, obviously these lines have changed throughout this past year and will continue to change, and this is also off of cap friendly. And it's also before free agency starts this offseason, so anything could happen essentially with this roster. Don't take this as Bible, because I'm not. But restricted free agents, you still have to sign Barrett Hayton to an extension. You still have Sean Dursey you got to sign to an extension. Should both get pay bumps. Hayton, I think, is making a decent amount. We'll see. Valimaki probably gets a decent amount. Not breaking the bank, but and Soderstrom needs an extension. UFAs, you got Josh Brown, Travis Dermott, and Boyd. So let me know what you think. Appreciate you. Take care, right?